Hi, everyone. We're so glad to have you here again today on our Friday Forum. This is something that was started over 4 years ago during COVID. I only thought it would last a couple of months, maybe 6 months. And here we are almost 4 years later. And I'm so thrilled because it's because of you. People have said, we love your forums. We want to hear more. We love the guests you have and the topics that you cover. So I'm glad to be with you here today. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I'm an educator, entrepreneur, and now a producer of these Friday Forum shows. I'm so glad to have with me today my friend and colleague, Jeff Levy from LA. So he hails from the same state that I hail from. Glad to have you here, Jeff.
Cyndy, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, whether it's on your Friday forums or whether it's over dinner in Barcelona or Madrid, as we did recently. Always love seeing you. And folks, Cyndy is a legend in the profession of college consulting and college counseling, and I've learned so much from her over the years. So it's an honor to be here.
You are always so kind. I sometimes thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. I think I get a little too much credit sometimes, but I do appreciate
Not
it. So.
true. You're too modest. I don't get too much credit.
As you're coming in, why don't you put in the chat your name and your location, and also have you filled out a FAFSA this year or not? That's our topic for today. I know it's a real popular topic. I've heard from parents this week who have their own children. We have Carmen with us today. She's going to manage the chat and the questions. And she is looking at doing the FAFSA. And are you looking forward to that experience,
No.
Carmen?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So we're glad to have you here today to talk about a topic. For many years, financial aid was not a topic that was covered by counselors, whether we were in the schools or in the college or as independent educational consultants. And some of you may know that's actually how I started doing doing college counseling. I started doing financial aid counseling. And it was because of my own personal experience. When I was in college, I had been awarded financial aid through the University of Colorado Boulder. And at some point, it must have been a change in the financial aid laws because I was getting it. And all of a sudden the next year when I applied again, just like Carmen's going to do, I came back and I got no financial aid. So I went to the financial aid office and said, like, what's going on here? What happened to my money? They said, oh, your dad has land. My dad was a cattle rancher, and he had told me I could go to college, but he said he wouldn't pay for it. So I knew I was on my own. And when they said, oh, well, your dad has land, he's a rancher, this is in Colorado, he can borrow money against the land and pay for your college. Well, I knew that was not happening. And so I was faced with the decision that I was going to have to drop out of college, go back to work, which I didn't want to do because I knew I would never get back. So, lots of other circumstances, I didn't have to drop out, and I learned about how financial aid works. And my mission to help families over the years to understand it and turn it from a big black box into a transparent process. And that's why I have you here with me today, Jeff, because we're going to talk about the new FAFSA and what that looks like and how how that's going so far. You can see we've got people here. I love, we got to see Monica from Switzerland recently in Spain. Glad to see you on here. We've got people from Pennsylvania, Sacramento, Redmond, Washington, Portland, Maine, Twin Cities. Yes, no, I've done it. No, I haven't. So It is a topic, especially this year, probably in the last 20 years, it's most fraught with anxiety and uncertainty and things like that. So, Jeff, I just shared my origin story a little bit. Tell us what about yourself. What's your background and how did you get into this aspect of working with students and families?
Well, I worked in the film business for about 30 years, first in New York and then in Los Angeles. And it was during the last writers' strike in '07 and '08 that I was had a lot of time on my hands. I was not a writer. I was a lighting person, a gaffer, but had a lot of time on my hands, and we were out of work for a long time. My savings account hemorrhaged down to probably a negative number. And my older daughter was in, I think, 11th grade at the time and starting to research colleges. And I had two reactions. One, I'm enjoying that process more than I thought I would, of kind of looking over her shoulder and learning about colleges. I knew absolutely nothing about college admission. I went to a state school. And my other reaction was one of panic. How am I going to pay for this when I don't know where my next paycheck is coming from? So I started learning about it. I enrolled in UCLA Extension just to take their introductory course. Our teacher for that course was this young 29-year-old associate assistant director of admission at Pitzer College, who had a great personal story to tell. And his name was Angel Perez. For those of you who know who Angel is, he's now the CEO of NACAC, and before that was VP of enrollment at Trinity College in Connecticut. He rocked my world, and I knew what my next profession would be. So that's how I began to learn about financial aid, understand its importance to parents, and irony of ironies, my daughter is now a television writer, and she just came off being out of work for her writer's strike, but she was in better shape financially than I was at that time. So that's my origin story.
Well, and you really hit on a really important point in that this does affect us as parents, and the goals and things that we have for our children is to send them to college, to give them that opportunity for higher education, but it has become so more expensive that now than it was, even in 2008. And so that has created an awful lot a lot more uncertainty.
When I got into the profession of college consulting, the prevalent in '09 probably, the main question then was, how is my child going to get in? And I think now there's been such a shift to how am I going to afford it? And I guess I have two lessons to share. One, if I could figure out how to understand financial aid, any counselors and consultants out there, and even parents, can understand it. Um, the other one is that for it's all about the college list. And I'm a firm believer that not only is academic fit and social cultural fit crucial in coming up with the right set of colleges for the kids we work with or for the kids who we're parenting, but smart financial options have to be an equally important factor. So I make it my business to understand right from the start, before I generate the list, where is this parent in terms of their ability to pay,
Mhm.
their willingness to pay, because those are two different but important questions. And where are they objectively on the needs spectrum? And these things are not difficult to figure out. We can maybe get into some of that in a little while, Cindy. They're not that hard to figure out, but they're not that invasive. We don't have to get copies of parents' tax returns to
Right.
know where they are on the needs spectrum. But I wouldn't know how to do my job without having a sense of all three of those things: ability to pay, willingness to pay, and approximate need eligibility. That precedes my coming up with colleges that I think would be a good fit.
Absolutely. Because it doesn't do a student any good to get into a college that they can't afford. And we had a little bit of that discussion last week with Peter Van Buskirk. And the question always comes up, well, should I mark I'm filing for financial aid on the form? Will that keep me out of the college? What difference does it make?
On the application,
Yeah.
checking on the application. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So this year there have been some changes that they've kind of been in the works for a couple of years, but they've been implemented. We have the new FAFSA. What are some concerns that you're hearing or you've seen with the submission of the new FAFSA? As you said, Carmen said, like, I haven't even done it yet. I know many families I've been pushing, just wait. There's no rush. We now have learned that the colleges aren't going to get the data right away. So those are other implications. So what are some things that you've experienced? And as those on the chat today, if there's things you've experienced, stick them in the chat. Part of what this conversation is to hear what your experiences and things are and share them with each other. So what are you finding, Jeff, in terms of that?
Well, just a little bit of background for those who aren't that familiar with it. The law changed, and there has been a complete restructuring of the FAFSA, which is the federal form, the free application for federal student aid. And it turns out that it's much more complicated than just changing a form. There is a whole superstructure that had to be changed, and it was, I think, like 30 years old. I mean, a lot of it was so old.
Oh, yeah.
And it was much more complicated than the Department of Education realized it would be. And so the release of the FAFSA, unfortunately, every year it comes out along with the CSS profile on October 1st. And the entire application process is kind of based on that date, because November 1st, the early decision date for many colleges, or November 15th, that requires, if you're applying for financial aid, submission of the FAFSA and any other forms by November 1st or November 15th, usually. This year, the FAFSA came out December 31st and didn't even come out. It was a slow rollout because they knew that there were a lot of things that had not yet been fixed or tested, field tested. So it has been a mess, to put it mildly, a catastrophe, maybe to put it less mildly. So, and Cindy, as you say, not only did the FAFSA come out later for parents and students to complete, and a reminder that these forms belong to the student, not to the parents, and there have been some changes, even more specific changes with that this year that we may want to talk about. But not only did the FAFSA come out really late, but then the next step in the process, which Cindy mentioned, the sending of what's called the ISIR, which is the institutional student individual record, or something like that. ISIR. I always forget exactly what it stands for.
I know government loves those acronyms, right?
Yeah, but that's what the Department of Education automatically sends to the institution after they've processed the FAFSA. In past years, it's taken with a few exceptions for complicated cases, it's taken 2 to 3 days to process a submitted FAFSA and then to send it to the school. And then the student would get an email 2, 3, 4 days later saying, your FAFSA has been processed. This year, that part of it, the sending of the ISIR to the institutions, has been substantially delayed. And the federal government, I haven't heard an update, but the federal government, Department of Education did state that the first batch of their ISIRs was not going to be sent to the colleges until early mid-March. So this pushes everything back. The one thing I will say, I'll say, well, yeah, you should be so lucky that I'm only going to say one thing.
We don't want you just to say one thing.
There are a lot of anxious parents. Get in touch with the financial aid office of each of the colleges your child is submitting to, your child or your client. Help the parents understand what each institution's deadline actually is this year, because they've all pushed it back. And many schools have also pushed back the enrollment commitment date, which typically has been May 1st. So you would get your acceptance, the student would get their acceptance on April 1st. Usually the financial aid offer roughly at that same time. They would have a month to to compare offers, and before they deposit by May 1st. That timeline has been upended. If colleges aren't even getting the ISIR until end of March, they're not sending out everybody's financial aid offer by April 1st. So all of this has been delayed. Let your families know that they should take a deep breath, find out the specific deadline for each school, and no one is going to, I hope no school is going to make you deposit by May 1st if you haven't even received your financial aid offer yet. So you should be fine.
Go ahead, Carmen.
Do you suggest that students wait to get submission confirmation before sending to other schools beyond the 20 that they're allowed on the form?
Well, even that has changed, right?
Well, the 20 is allowed on the form now, and in the past, it's only been 10. So that's a positive change. And I hope we can get into some of the good things that at least next year when the FAFSA is fixed, because there have been a lot of positive changes. So I have mixed feelings about that question, Carmen, because I think 20 colleges is more than enough. So I mean, I've had students apply to more. I think it's a mistake in almost all cases, and usually a result of misplaced anxiety. If you've got a college list of 12 colleges, maybe 14, that's a balanced list and all being good fits, you should be fine. But if I have to answer that question, I would say yes, absolutely. I mean, they're going to have to wait until the student, and it's not the parent, the student gets the email from the Department of Education saying your FAFSA, confirming that the FAFSA has been processed before they can go back in and make any changes.
Yeah. And I think that's the key, especially this year, is that communication. But when you have 20 schools and you're having to communicate with 20 different colleges, that's a lot of communication. And so that makes it easy to drop some balls. But talking about those deadlines and having that shift this year, a lot of colleges will put out information that says, oh, you have to commit early so that you have housing. So are those housing, how is housing being impacted by this?
I'm not seeing a lot of that among my students. But Cindy, you and I both know that there are some colleges that are doing that. And, it annoys me that they are, because it's just ratcheting up, the pressure and anxiety.
Mhm.
But but on the other hand, there are institutions that are not able to house every applicant they admit for all kinds of reasons. So I understand it from their point of view as well. Um, I would open a conversation with the admission, which office would be, I guess, calling the housing office. I would open up a conversation with the institution to see if they can extend it. That would be my first thing I would do. Second, if they can't, if it's not a large deposit, and if it's a school high on your list, I would probably pay it. I would squawk a little bit, but I would probably pay it.
Yeah, and that's what I've seen happen in the past, and I expect we're going to see a lot more this year is those housing deposits will be put down in order to save those spots. But as you said, that's more, I think it tends to be, if those college admits a larger class than they yield a larger class than they expect. There's some other extenuating circumstances, but the key thing is that conversation. So what are some of those changes? What are the good changes? What are the bad changes? Or not necessarily. What are the positive changes and the other changes that are generating controversy? Let me put it that way.
Okay, well, I think the two biggest changes, and the reason, or one of the important reasons why the FAFSA was changed by law, is that historically only 60% of graduating high school seniors even submitted the FAFSA. And that's been true for a long time. So this is a problem. It's a social problem. Who doesn't submit the FAFSA? More often than not, it's the families who are afraid of it, who are intimidated by it, who found it too difficult, who would be eligible for need-based aid. So the number of questions, they promised that, it'll be reduced down to 36. Actually, the number of questions has not really been reduced by much from the prior FAFSA. Some cases it may even be more questions, but it's a much easier and intuitive form to fill out. So I think that's a positive change. This year, submission numbers, of course, are even down from last year at this point, because of the mess. But hopefully by next year, the year after, the number of high school seniors who submit will go up. The second important change is that it will allow more students coming from low-income families to qualify for federal Pell Grants, and it increases the amount of money that they receive in Pell Grants. Pell Grants have lagged terribly over the years behind inflation.
Yep.
So where a Pell Grant 30 years ago, and I don't know the date when they first came into being, so maybe I'm wrong, but in the beginning, Pell Grants would cover most of tuition. Now they cover a fraction of tuition. So that's another big change. Should I go on with additional changes?
Yeah.
So
And while you're thinking, I just want to point out Dahlia has put in the chat too, and this is very helpful. She works in a university in the South, and she's mentioned how the housing and orientation are pushing things into July and August. And I love that their financial aid office is sending emails to parents and students, offering parent webinars. So that is very proactive I think that's very commendable that they're doing that.
I agree, Dahlia, thank you. So other important changes in the past, this is just a form that's an interface that sits on top of 12, 14-page formula that at the end spits out one single number. That number used to have, and I'm not sure what it's going to have, didn't have a dollar sign. It usually had a few zeros, and it looked like a serial number. It's like, well, where's my EFC? Where's my expected family contribution? I'm not sure what it's going to look like this year, but they've changed the name from expected family contribution to Student Aid Index, SAI. They're essentially the same thing. It is the number that the financial aid office needs. It's kind of a measure of the family's need eligibility, or actually the opposite, what they're technically able to pay. And then
Their financial strength as a family. And it's over time. Like, here's your family's financial strength measured in over a period of time, not just this window of July or August or such. So yeah.
Right. I mean, they're looking at income from 2 years prior.
Yeah.
So if the student is a senior in high school right now and enrolling in 2024, the FAFSA looks, and the CSS profile, look at your income from 2022, 2 years prior to 2024. They're looking at current assets, but they're also assuming that you have been saving over time. And I think that's what you're saying, Cindy, that it's not just a snapshot of one moment.
Right.
It's a snapshot over time with an expectation that you've saved. So that EFC, or now SAI, is always a higher number than every one of my families expect it will be. Some of the other important changes that are positive, I mean, this is controversial. I'm not a big supporter of this change, but I know a lot of families are, is that the question that used to be on the FAFSA and still is on the CSS profile, has anyone not listed on this form paid any bills or given you any money to the student? That was, the grandparent 529, that would have to be reported and would be calculated as untaxed student income, which is a very high assessment. Actually, that was a 50% assessment.
Yep.
And that had to be reported on the FAFSA up until this year, when that question has been removed. So for families with generational wealth, a big advantage to them. Another change that we mentioned before, it used to be you could only list 10 colleges, now you can list 20. Now, some other more technical changes, and this is important for us to be telling, if we're consultants or counselors, it's important for us to be telling our families about. The FAFSA now consists of contributors who have to fill out their own section. Didn't used to work that way. And so who are contributors? Number one, the student, obviously it's their form. So they'll be filling out their income and asset information and other demographic information. And one or both parents, depending. So if in the case of divorce, and this is a new change, separation or divorce, only one parent is a contributor. And the parent who is considered the contributor, who has to enter their financial information, is the one who has contributed more financially to the student in the year to date. Past years, it was the parent who the student lived with more. And that was a gigantic loophole, because if they lived with the mom, for example, who is a full-time homemaker, and the dad makes $900,000 a year, All they would have to put down is the mom's financial information, and they would be eligible for need-based aid based on that.
Yep. Oh, and that is a huge change and difference. And it is going to impact a lot of families, especially in those kinds of circumstances. Go ahead, Carmen.
Without the EFC calculator, what is the best practice for families to calculate their SAI or financial strength? Colleges have said that their net price calculators are not accurate until the SAI is known.
Or not what?
Are not accurate until the SAI is known.
The problem with the net price calculators is that they haven't been updated yet to reflect the new formula, which results in an SAI. So it's a real problem this year. I would run a bunch of net price calculators as they exist now on each college's website. I would do that knowing they're less accurate than they were last year. I would consult my chart, not mine. It's Big J Educational Consulting. We have a chart that will tell you what percentage of need a college meets. So if you have learned from running a few net price calculators that your old EFC is $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000, and your child or your client wants to apply to schools that have a $70,000 or $80,000 or $90,000 sticker price, even if it's not accurate to the dollar or even to $10,000, you know that we know that this is a student with moderate to substantial need. And the schools that belong on their list, if the parents can't pay the sticker price, should be schools that are generous with need-based aid. Go to our chart, it's free. Click on the header at the top of the column, which says percent of need met, and it will instantaneously rearrange that the 420 something colleges on there according to largest percent of need met to lowest. If, on the other hand, you find out that you're from running 4, 5, 6 old, granted, net price calculators, that you're a family with little or no need, that your EFC or SAI, if they have updated it, is $80,000 or $90,000 or $100,000 or $150,000 a year, you may be horrified at how big that number is. But that's the number that's going to go to the financial, or something like it, is what's going to go to the financial aid office. You need to look for schools that are generous with merit aid, non-need-based aid, and you can sort that in our chart as well.
Yeah. And that's a key thing, is to understand where you fall on that line versus need versus merit. And that helps drive your planning, your list, and all those kinds of things. So, and I'm going to be doing a workshop on this to incorporate these different aspects. So be watching your emails for information. It'll be an interactive 3-hour workshop. But, going back to just being able to calculate this, I mean, yeah, we used to get from the Federal Register every year the tables, and you can sit down and manually with a pen and paper calculate out what the EFC was. And actually, an SAI is not a new term. That's what it used to be before it was called the EFC. So what they're doing is not new and groundbreaking, and bringing some of these other aspects in that they're bringing back in are things that have been in the FAFSA before, and then were taken out and now put back in particular business assets and farms. Many of you know, I live in the middle of the agricultural area. We have more cows here than we have people. I work with families and dairies and orchards and all these different things. And for the last 10 or 15 years, we haven't had to put down their farms, their farm assets, their small businesses. And a lot of times they're intertwined because they didn't count on the FAFSA, but we had to put them on the profile. So we did FAFSA only private schools. And now that's all going to change. So what about the profile? Jeff, how has all this changed on the FAFSA impacted the profile? And tell us what the profile is and
The
how that's important.
CSS, so about any school that you're applying for financial aid from will require the FAFSA. Most schools use the FAFSA not just to calculate federal aid that the student would be eligible for, but also institutional aid,
Yep.
which turns out for most families, by far the largest amount of grants and scholarships come from the institution, not from the federal government. So the FAFSA is used for that. But about 170 undergraduate institutions use a second form. Some use their own institutional form, but the most popular of these, prevalent of these other forms is the CSS profile. It's owned by a company you might not have ever heard of called the College Board. And who also brings you the SAT, the AP program, TOEFL, et cetera, et cetera. It's don't get me started.
Yeah, that nice nonprofit that we all
yeah, a nonprofit. So about 170 schools use them. These tend to be the most selective. They privates. There are a few publics on that list as well, also typically pretty selective. It's a much more intrusive, much more complicated form to complete. But those schools are using, when they're using the CSS profile, they are calculating institutional aid with that form and federal aid with the FAFSA. The CSS profile has not changed. If in the case of separation or divorce, they're still asking about both biological parents and their households. In the case of a grandparent 529, they're still asking that question. So be careful when advising the family on maybe some new loopholes that the student is not also applying to schools that use the CSS profile, because all of that will be exposed in the CSS profile.
Yeah. And I understand a lot more colleges, because of the difficulties, the challenges, the changes in the FAFSA, are going to be relying more on the profile, and those that use the profile might be able to generate financial aid awards earlier because they have that data from the profile.
Absolutely. So here's where the College Board kind of jumped at an opportunity. But you're absolutely right, Cindy, that they're already getting more financial information through the CSS profile than they ever would have from the FAFSA. So schools that use the CSS profile were learning already, because that came out on October 1st. So we're learning that many of those schools are generating a very accurate preliminary financial aid award. And some have even come out and have said, we're going to consider this an official award. And after we've processed your FAFSA, if it looks like you deserve less or you're eligible for less, we're going to meet our original commitment. Why are they doing this? Because they want students to deposit and enroll before everybody, before those schools that are using the FAFSA. And another program that Cindy, you and I have talked about it, and I've talked about it with a few of you I know are at this conversation. The College Board has just started, or last year started, a pilot program for the CSS Profile Lite.
Yep.
And boy, are they taking advantage of it this year. And it's a way to, it's kind of a FAFSA, it's like CSS Profile Lite. It's kind of like a FAFSA. So I know that this year, this pilot program, it's still a pilot program, but it has expanded tremendously. So I think we're going to see that in the years to come as well.
I think so too. I think we're going to see more colleges go to that.
Yeah.
Years and years and years ago, the profile formula calculation was available, and then the College Board put it behind a wall and said, you know, we will only make this available to paying institutions. So that transparency was eliminated many, many years ago. So we can't really go back in and say, oh, well, here's how the FAFSA or the profile is going to calculate. But it has been covered by many different, there are other tools and resources available that can help at least estimate that and that kind of thing. Looks like Carmen has a question. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Carmen, go ahead.
No worries. So in regard to the CSS profile, does it still account for 2 students in college at the same time? I know the FAFSA no longer does.
That's what I wanted to interrupt Carmen and talk about. So thank you for asking that, Carmen, and for the question. That's exactly where I wanted to go. This is very controversial. Part of the new FAFSA mandate is that they had to remove the division of the parent contribution by the number of students in college. As Cyndy well knows from having handwritten in the answers on the EFC formula, there was a line item that had a little division symbol, and you would divide toward the very end, you would divide the student's EFC by the number of siblings in college at the same time. That item is gone from the FAFSA, but the question is still asked on the FAFSA, how many siblings? So it's no longer in the formula, but it is an informational item on the FAFSA, leaving the decision up to the financial aid office about whether they're going to take that into account. Now, we don't know. I mean, I've seen colleges who have come out publicly saying, and these tend to be the wealthier, the more selective, who still want, they want to hook those, the applicants that they've admitted they want them to enroll. So a lot of those colleges, I think, will continue to take the number of siblings into account because they can afford it. But a lot of colleges won't. And I think part of the data collection that I know I want to do this cycle is to see how the number of students in college has or has not impacted the financial aid award at all kinds of institutions.
Yeah. And it is going to have repercussions over the next few years. You know, we're going to see how what they do this year might be different from next year, and especially as the dates and they return to a more normal cycle. I want to return.
Siblings will be locked in basements and not allowed to apply to college until the first one. No, I'm kidding. No.
Exactly. You're going to community college. Oh, you're taking a gap year. So what about families? So Magdalena asked this question. How would you advise families who have students who currently in the college, just like Carmen, you know, we all have kids, many of you have your own children who have to fill up the FAFSA, you know, for next year, and they're already in college. So, and
in terms of the whether to do it sooner or later, like to wait as long as possible. I'm not.
Yeah. Is there any other tips or things? I know my daughter, you know, people at her work have just been all up in arms. Like, we usually fill this out in December. Now what are we going to do? And such. So I heard you say something at the beginning. So what do you advise?
So I advise getting in touch with the financial aid office at every school. You need to know when the returning student deadline is, because it's always been after the first year students. I mean, that's the pressure cooker for the financial aid office, is to get those admitted students packaged, get their awards packaged, so that it can be sent out in time with the acceptance letter. And then they get to returning students after that. So who knows when those deadlines are going to be? I mean, they may have been set by some colleges, maybe some colleges haven't yet, but this is for everybody, wait as long as you can, because they're fixing problems on the fly. Someone said they're, still building the airplane while it's in the air. And I think that's an apt metaphor. So wait as long as you can. Don't miss any deadlines. If you need to negotiate an extension, I know colleges are much more open to that this year than they have been in the past. Wait as long, know the deadline, negotiate an extension if necessary, and wait as long as you can.
Yeah. And I really think that if you're already in college, you have children in college, or you have children in college and a high school student going, that communication with the college is so key. I know many colleges, you said, Jeff, they know that this gap is going to happen, and they've run analysis because the data, they do have that data available. Like, how many of our children or our students at our institution have siblings in college, so they can see what that gap's going to be. And I think that's a really good point for us to remember as parents and educators, that there is a formula. There's a reason all these questions are asked. These questions on the FAFSA are not just randomly picked. They influence a formula, a process that is behind it. And so understanding the reason for the questions really helps you understand what's going on with your family and your family process. But I had 3 kids in college. I had 3 daughters in college. And if we had to go from having all 3 on the EFC, because that was a family number, which is why it was, it was divided out, to 3 separate, if we went from one number to a triple number, I don't know what we would have done. I declare, have one get married, I guess, it was, or go in the military or something. I mean, I don't know how families are expected to absorb this when they have those kinds of issues, when they weren't counted before, and all of a sudden now they are when you're in college. Same thing with the business and the farm, or, which parent, the non-working unemployed parent and the employed parent now is the one. How do you adjust for that? It's not going to be an easy process at all.
Carmen, are you seeing more questions about 2 kids in college?
There are so many questions.
Well, we may
Sorry.
not get to all of them. We've got about 10 minutes left here.
Because I'm reading a few that I would like to answer quickly.
Okay, go ahead.
Does the CSS profile still account for 2 students in college at the same time? CSS profile does. Great question.
They do, but they've never split it in half, but they've given a percentage. So it's like 60-40. So if you have one, then maybe it's 60%. And then the more you have, it goes up. The other thing that I think people need to know about the profile is a very customized form. So what questions go on and how the formula is set up is dependent on which colleges you have on the profile. And they have a bank of questions, and the colleges on the back end will say, oh, I want questions 6, 8, 10, and 12 from the profile. And this other college says, I want 6, 8, 4, and 14 on the profile. So then you create that list. And if you add colleges to your profile, then you change that form. So it's very college dependent.
And the formula is proprietary. They do not share what's under the hood, compared to what the FAFSA does, where anyone can access the formula. So it's very tricky. But on the other hand, many of the most generous colleges, in terms of need-based aid, are using the CSS profile. So, they kind of balance each other out. Don't stay away from profile schools because you think they're looking at too many aspects. The net price, maybe my 2 daughters wound up going to Ivy League colleges that were meeting 100% of need. It cost me less
Mhm.
than it would have if they went to a University of California campus as a in-state resident. Sorry, Carmen.
All right, that's what happened to me too. Um,
Do you
there
want
is a
to,
question
are you allowed to say where that happened to you?
at Stevens Institute of Technology.
Good.
Yeah,
Mm.
private institution. Um, so there, can you advise on non-invasive questions to ask parents to determine the three areas mentioned: ability to pay, willingness to pay, and need eligibility?
Yeah. So on my intake form, when I'm meeting the family for the very first time, I send them that form. I send the parents a parent intake form. I have a question that says, is the cost of college a factor in where your child will enroll? And if they say no to that, I don't have to talk to them about financial aid again. If they say yes to that, what opens up in this, what they call smart logic, what opens up is it one of many factors, multiple choice? Is it one of many factors? Is it a significant factor? Is it an overriding factor? So before I've even met the parents, I know subjectively how important a factor financial aid will be for them. I don't know if their child is need eligible or not. And then I tell them in most years, this year's an exception, but every other year, I tell them that I will meet with them privately, not including the student. And before we meet, run 5 or 6 net price calculators. I also advise them to run the College Board EFC calculator. And this is a difficult year because a lot of those calculators, as someone said, have not been updated. But if they send me the results pages of those calculations, I don't know their tax returns. I just see what those calculators are saying they are expected to pay. So, and that gives me, and the more they do, the more of those they do, the more I can get a pretty good sense of roughly where they are. And then I know which are the set of colleges that make the most sense for their student.
I think that going through that is a very educational experience in and of itself too, because you learn what the colleges are looking for, you learn what factors are really influencing, you can see how the numbers shift, maybe based on income, asset, those kinds of things. The other thing that I would add to that is there are tools out there. Haruka mentioned mytuition.org. There's College Aid Pro. We used to have a whole FAFSA calculator and a profile calculator in Guided Path.
I love that calculator, by the way. I used that. I relied on that.
Yeah, it was done at a time to help build that transparency, and families could see how much, because they're also like, here's my contribution, but what can I do to influence it? Well, is it coming from income? Is it coming from assets? Is it coming from combinations? So we broke all of that down. So look for other tools that might give you that opportunity. Those are paid subscriptions. But sometimes I think taking advantage of that just gives you a lot more, it'll save you time.
And on the question of willingness to pay, I mean, family values. We can't impose our values on the families we're working with. For a very quick example, I had a LA-based family years ago. She was an executive, the mother at Disney, and the dad was a successful jazz musician. And they were making close to $1 million a year. And at the initial consultation, they told me, we're not going to pay more than $20,000 a year for our child's college education. That's what we think it's worth. And I pointed out, well, that won't even cover a University of California campus. So I just want you to know, what the shrinking set of colleges that will buy you. And this kid wound up going to a Cal State for about $20,000 a year. That's their choice. That's not, that's not up to me. I'm there to help everyone achieve their goals.
Right, right. And that is a big important point, is there's a difference between, what the calculation is, what you're able to pay and what you're willing to pay. So, and that's huge. So that does make a difference. Okay, I think we have time for one more question or two. Carmen, what you got?
I think everyone would be interested if you can repeat the questions you ask on your intake form again.
So the question is the cost of college a factor in where your child will enroll? And if they say yes to that, I use it's called Alchemer. It used to be called Survey Gizmo, I think, before that. But I think all surveys are the same now. Depending upon how they answer it, a multiple choice set of questions follow. So if they say yes, it is a factor in where my child will enroll, they have a choice then. One of many factors, a significant factor, an overriding factor. And that gives me a lot of information about how important it is that I find schools that are going to be a good financial fit for the family.
And I think that's the key. And I hope everybody's gotten the message, is don't be afraid to ask these questions. Families are thinking about it more and more now than ever before. So that shouldn't be a hesitation on your part. I know I've always asked for tax returns. I mean, it was just part of what I did. And sometimes when we're hesitant to do things, then people are hesitant to respond. But if you just go in there and say, hey, I need ABC, or here are the questions. I love doing questions on a survey. It's very insightful, gives them a little reflection, and it's not, it's a little more comfortable. I think that's a great way to do things, Jeff. I really appreciate that. This is a topic we could talk about forever and ever, but we have run out of time. What would be one final piece of advice that you would give, Jeff?
Boy. I would say, well, I'm going to be repeating myself. But I think it's really important to get a sense of what the families can afford before you come up with the college list. As Cindy said, this is not a shot in the dark. We can figure out with the tools, with the free tools we have at our disposal, where the families are on the needs spectrum, and therefore what are the most appropriate schools to put on the child's college list. So that to me is the most important thing.
Yeah, it all stems around that. So, Jeff, thank you so much for being here today. And thanks for everybody. We've had a very lively chat, and that is always enriches all of us, and sharing what's going on for you and your families and those you work with. Thank you, Carmen, for helping us. I know we'll miss you next week, but we'll abide somehow. Join me next week. We are tomorrow is the first digital SAT that's going to be launched here in the United States. So Robert Schaefer is going to come back, and we're going to talk about how did it go. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, talk to your students. I will tell you, I looked to see where my students can go take the SAT in the May or June, and I was very surprised to see the answer. So I'll share that next week, and will be interesting to see how our students do. So Jeff, thank you. Have a great weekend. Everybody else have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here in another week.
Thanks, Cindy. Thanks, Carmen.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Happy Friday.